my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo. Where you question where you fit and every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course. And man, first and foremost, I'd like to apologize. I know I left you guys hanging on Thursday for our Thursday Trends episode. I didn't do one last week unexpectedly. I'm not gonna lie, I'll be completely open, transparent, and honest. I just wasn't up for it. And I don't really know. My anxiety was like really crazy that day. I think I had maybe pushed myself a little bit too far. I had been working like crazy the weekend prior, and normally my weekends, because I feel bad, so I want to make sure I know it's a part of people's routines, and I hate when my favorite like podcast or things that are part of my normal routine gets messed up unexpectedly, right? So I that's why I'm explaining myself, but I had worked a ton that weekend prior, DJing wise. So I did 3 gigs in a row, Friday, Saturday, Sunday night. And on top of that, like I've mentioned before, I own a brick and mortar U-Haul business. So I had to be here in the morning, Saturday and Sunday, which ended up just completely throwing me off. So I was running on I was getting home from DJing at like 4:30, 5 o'clock, and then by the time you settle in, get to bed, and then I would sleep for an hour, have to get up to go over to the store and open it up and get everything set up for the day for customers and things like that. So I was just operating on literally like zero sleep basically, and then I didn't take it as easy as I would have liked to. I think earlier in the week, and then it just caught up with me as I was trying to record the podcast, and I just felt I just didn't have it in me. So I apologize, but I'm gonna be open and honest with y'all about that. It was just like whenever I get really like just exhausted, my anxiety like goes through the roof, and my depression also begins to act up, and it's genuinely crippling. So I have to be very mindful of that. And, it's a good reminder, I think, for myself to get better at taking care of myself and sort of the common practice of, self-care. I talk about this all the time. This isn't really necessarily what this podcast is even about today, but I want to be honest. I think we all go through things like this sometimes, and I think, a younger version of me probably would have just like sucked it up and done it, and it would have been like half-assed and whatever it was, and it would have just made things worse, and I would have just kept going down a deeper and deeper cycle until I finally like genuinely was physically exhausted and couldn't get up and had to sleep for 2 days straight, and younger me, his schedule allowed for that a little bit more than it does now. I have a lot more responsibility. So, I'm just trying to not get into that bad mental place that I know I could very easily slip into if I don't take care of myself. Particularly, I've been like on a really good creative streak and just feeling really, really good. And I don't want to fuck that up and just kind of go into zombie mode, which like I guess is maybe good for production on the surface level, but like is destroying me internally, and like I can't function as a regular human being, and I'm miserable doing things that I love doing, which I don't want to get to, right? So that's the long version of why we didn't have a Thursday Trends on Thursday. So I apologize for that. I meant to make a post about it, but literally I was just done. I was like, I gotta just climb in my bed and like try and rest as much as I can and recuperate a little bit. And I did that, and then on this last weekend I rested a lot more and prioritized like that as a goal of mine for the weekend, which, you know, the hyper productive part of me, the FOMO part of me, wants to go be doing a million things, wants to be go and be social, blah blah blah, but I shut that down, made it a point for me to get some rest, and I woke up today, and in general start off this week just feeling amazing and just like back to myself. So yeah, that's the long version of that. With that said, we are going to have an amazing guest on the show. I actually had his wife, Dr. Esther Z100 on last week's episode, and together they have a community brand called Be.Act.Change, and they're doing some incredible work with that, of inspiring people, and you know, he helped Esther out with her book, Creating Your Limitless Life, and sort of, I guess, the philosophy of the practice of that actual thing. And he's a really interesting guy. You know, he has a career in diplomacy, like working for the government. You know, he's worked in international economics. So just a lot of really interesting, I think, vantage points for him to speak on that is fresh for the podcast. And also he speaks a lot about male vulnerability, which you guys know that I'm big on as a mental health advocate, particularly when I speak to the male perspective, where, you know, many of us feel like we can't share things, right? So he speaks on that a lot. So I just thought it really, you know, cool person to have on the show, and it ended up being a great conversation. So I'm really excited to bring that to everybody. And yeah, it's a little bit long, so I'm just going to get into it. I think I hijacked the first part of this show. But you know, always like to be open and transparent with everybody. With that said, let's get into my conversation with Dr. Paul Rivera as a part of our Mi Gente segment. Mi Gente! My guest today is the co-founder of Be.Act.Change, Dr. Paul Rivera. How you feeling, my bro?
I'm feeling amazing, man. I'm so glad to be here. It's a huge, huge honor to be here. I love this show. I love what you do. I love what you stand for. So I'm just glad to be a part of it.
Oh, thank you so much, man. I really, really do appreciate that. And we had your wife, Dr. Esther, on the show recently as well. She's absolutely incredible. So I'm glad we're
She's
able to,
amazing.
Yeah, keep the connection rolling over here. And I know you guys, obviously, you work on you know, Be.Act.Change together. But for you, I'd love to kind of just get a little bit more of an introduction into a bit about your story and kind of, you know,
sure.
Your experience and kind of what you feel like you're adding to that brand as well.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, you know, for one, the whole Be.Act.Change concept is something that it works because we do it together. So that's something that's really huge for us. It's something we always wanted, really, from the time that we met. So it's such a good feeling for us to actually see that launching and getting off the ground and having success. It's amazing.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm Paul Rivera. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. My mom is Mexican. My dad is from El Salvador. And, you know, if you're familiar with the Latino community in LA or frankly, almost any large urban area, you know that you can pretty much live your life on a day-to-day basis, except for maybe at school, without having to speak English, right? So I grew up in a very, very Latino sort of environment, Latino household. My story kind of goes, there's lots of stories. I love telling stories, but for Be.Act.Change and what we do, I can pretty much sort of bring it down to like this one particular story. From when I was about 5 years old, my aunt, who is 10 years older than me, so my mom's younger sister, who's 10 years older than me, she was getting ready for her quinceañera, and I was her dance partner. I loved it. I was 5 years old, and I would dance with her. And I'm pretty old, right? So this was still in the disco era. It was the 70s. And she would put on her records. And my grandparents had that big, I don't know if you remember those, but like this huge console stereo with the speakers that would light up and all of this. And so she and I would dance and we would rehearse together and all this. And one day we're there, and this friend of my grandparents comes in. I don't even remember who it was, this guy that would come by every now and then. And he sees me dancing with her. And he kind of comes up to me and he says, "Qué bonita te ves bailando," right? So for those of you who don't speak Spanish, right, he was basically implying that I was doing something very girly in dancing with my aunt, right? And I saw my dad's face, who heard it, and he was sort of mortified, and I was mortified, and it was a really awful, awkward moment. And so, I mean, needless to say, I never danced with her again for that quinceañera. But I also basically never danced again for the next 35 years. Like that moment caused this deep scar in me that I associated that activity with being super feminine. And in this machista environment that I grew up in, nothing is worse than appearing feminine.
Sure.
Right? So and so it devolved from there, right? So I became a really heavy people pleaser. I became somebody who the last thing that I wanted to do was to displease those that were around me, right? So I would mold myself to the person, to the situation, to the environment, to the point where I really lost track of who I was, right? What was my identity? When we talk about, now it's easy to talk about authenticity and all of that stuff and identity, but in reality, it means that sometimes you look in the mirror and you don't recognize the person there anymore. And you don't know what it is that even you stand for anymore because you've given it all away, right? And it's this whole story that I mean, think about it. I was married once before, and I think that I was a very easy person to be with in a lot of ways because I would adapt to the person, to the situation. But every time you do that, and what you don't realize is that every time you do that, you're giving away a piece of you. You're losing a little piece of you. And that buildup, that anxiety creates a tension in you, right? And at the same time, I was brought up in this environment where we didn't talk about our problems. We didn't talk about what was bothering us because that was feminine too, right? You have to be strong. You have to always be in control. So I was brought up not communicating. I was brought up not expressing who the real authentic me was. And I basically got to a point where I snapped. I snapped. Like I lost it. I completely blew up my life. I changed everything in one swoop that had been bothering me for decades at that point. You know, it exploded. It was an explosion, and explosions are horrible. You can imagine, you know, that's not how it has to be. You know, if you are a person who's in touch with yourself and your authenticity, and you learn how to communicate that to those around you, it doesn't have to be an explosion. You can make all kinds of massive changes with planning and as a team with your partner and all of that. But I didn't have those tools at that point. So, you know, it was that. So part of this movement for me is creating a space for Latinos, for Latino men in particular, to understand how important it is for us to be able to speak, for us to be able to talk about the things that bother us, for what it means to live authentically, to start to redefine what we mean when we say what it means to be a man, like redefining our concept of masculinity. It's not just one of swallowing everything and not showing any pain. It's actually one of learning to be vulnerable enough to tell you when I'm not feeling good, to let you know when I need help, you know? So all of this. And so when we bring that in, you know, if you talk to Esther, so I know she told you all about finding your superpower and finding your purpose and aligning your actions to it and creating that resilience. All of that is an extension of being in touch with yourself and learning to live in a way that is aligned with who you actually are. You know, when we talk about being men and being masculine and all of this, we want to bring our best strengths into the world for our families, for ourselves, for our children, for our communities. And my belief begins from the premise that the best way to do that is by getting in touch with what it is that I personally have best to bring to the world, however that works out. So that's sort of the genesis of it. You know, she and I have similar but different backgrounds, but we complement each other because this is sort of the overall approach that we bring to Be.Act.Change.
Yeah, no, and you hit on a lot of things that resonate with me personally, and one thing that stood out what you just said was you were an easy person to be with, basically, right? Because you were so agreeable, and I think that the part about this whole authenticity conversation that I think kind of doesn't get spoken about quite enough is the transition from maybe being somebody that is well liked. You have a lot of maybe you have a large social circle, and your calendar is always booked and busy, right? And when you begin to live a bit more authentically and have boundaries and are far more expressive in what you like and don't like, it begins to rub certain people the wrong way in your life, right? And I think that is a bit of a jarring experience that I know that I've personally gone through, that almost makes you question your own authenticity, right? And if it's almost even worth the journey. So I'd be curious if you had your own sort of experiences within that, and how you sort of became comfortable with the idea of maybe not being someone's cup of tea, right? At the end of the day.
For sure. I will tell you that as part of that whole explosion and blow up scenario,
Sure.
It created a situation where a lot of the people that I would hang out with, a lot of people who were my friends in the past, sort of came to a point where they, how do I say, today, almost everyone that I hung out with back then is gone from my life. They're gone from my life. There were people that I thought would be my friends forever who have disappeared. I haven't talked to them. I haven't heard from them in over a decade. And these were people that I shared work with, I shared life experiences with, all of this. To come, exactly as you say, to the realization that they hung out with me, or I hung out with them because I was the one that was putting forth all the effort. These were people who were my colleagues, they were my companions, but at the end of the day, they were not my champions, right? They were not the people who were with me when I needed help and support. They're not the people who would go on the journey with me in a non-judgmental way. So it's one of the scary things, because we're humans and we long for connection and community and companionship. But to realize that the entire circle that might be around you is fake, it's weak, it's not real, it's not truly supportive, is a huge place to get to in your mind, because then you realize what am I doing? What's going on, and what do I need to do differently? And it's interesting because I would say that today, I have a smaller group of friends. Definitely, I have a smaller group of friends. I have a nucleus of people, but those are my people. They're my people. You know what I mean? They're the ones that, it's not even like it's cute to say, that, I need to call you at 3 a.m. because there's an emergency. That's fine. They are definitely that. But it's more like the people that I say, you know what? We have this crazy idea. We want to change the world, and we have this crazy idea. And who are the people who look you in the eye and say, you know what, you are the person to do that 100%. I'm behind you. I'm going to be your first backer. Those are your champions, right? Those are the people that you need in your corner. And if you have to let go of a bunch of people who are really there to criticize you, to not back you up, to tell you all the reasons why you can't and it's not going to work, then it's worth it to let them go. That nucleus, that core, those are the people that you nurture. Those are the people that you're gonna springboard each other into heights that neither of you had imagined before. It's gold.
Yeah, no, that's so beautifully said. And I'm curious you talk about this time period of kind of blowing everything up, right? And I think blowing it up is the easy part, right? It's easy to burn it all down, basically. I think the hard part is actually building from a place of substance, right? And building from a place of not accepting any less than you feel like you deserve, essentially, right? That is actually
Right.
the tough part, because it means saying having more no's than yeses, right? You're accepting far less than you were before. So I'm curious, after blowing everything up, then what was the journey of really intentionally building and crafting the life that you were longing for at that point? Like, what did that look like? Challenging yourself to seek out all that you felt like you were missing in your life.
Right. It was really tough. I mean, I will say I'm not going to minimize the difficulty, the impact of blowing up your life, because the truth is that it was something that was 15, 20 years in the making for me. You know what I mean? So to have finally gotten to that point where I couldn't tolerate it anymore was pretty big. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people were hurt in that process, so that part, I don't want to overly minimize that, but you're absolutely right. Like, okay, you did this, there's no going back. Right. So what are you going to do? How are you going to pick up the pieces? How are you going to not make the same mistakes again? And it is incredibly hard. I would say number one, and one of the things that I advocate a lot to my Latino listeners, to my African-American listeners, my immigrant listeners, it's okay to go to therapy. It's okay to seek help. And it's, my family, I know Esther's family, all of them still pretty much think that they tell us, eso es para locos, that's for crazy people. And we're not crazy, we're not going to do that. And so there's such a stigma, and we see, and we say that, we can say that sort of jokingly, we see it in memes all the time, but the truth is that all that bears out in the statistics. When we look at mental health care, mental health impacts, all these things in the Latino community in the United States, we are doing really poorly. So we say that we're coping, we say that we're toughening up, but we're actually doing it really badly, And so first thing is absolutely going to therapy. And when I say going to therapy, I mean for real going to therapy, like meaning it, like with the intention of becoming a better, stronger, more authentic person, Like I had gone to therapy before with my ex, we had done therapy together before, and I think, in retrospect, I know that I was not putting my full self into it. It was something that I was not really devoted to the process or the outcome in a way that would really lead to growth and healing, right? So that's the first thing. That you got to talk to somebody else. You can't stay spinning in your head. And again, especially for the men, this is something that as men we're taught to do. Deal with your own problems, right? Toughen up, se más macho, whatever it is, you know what I mean? We're taught to just swallow it, Like I find it really, really cool, actually. I know that you work on another podcast also, right? The Street Stoic.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I think I love words. I speak 6 languages. I love words. I think that Stoic and Stoicism are 2 of the most misunderstood and misused words, right? Because your podcast, The Street Stoic, I've listened to several episodes of it, and it's really about living authentically and developing that resilience and learning how to take the wisdom from the ancient Stoics to live a stronger, more connected life. But in modern terms, the word Stoic means to endure pain without complaint. That's what it means to be Stoic. So those are 2 very different things, right? So we are taught as men, as Latinos, to be Stoic, but not to follow the teachings of Stoicism.
Right.
So it's a fascinating nuance that I think people need to sort of come around to a little bit more,
Yeah. I think a lot of the misconception around the idea of Stoicism is almost like you're never affected by anything, very like stone face, like, to the world type of thing, no emotions almost, essentially, right? And I think the actual real, kind of power behind it is the idea of feeling your emotions but not being overcome by them to the point that you can't actually process them in a healthy manner. And I think that is the actual definition of it that I try to apply, of always looking at it from a more calm place rather than like a reactive place,
Right.
And yeah, to your point, yeah, I think that is a bit of the misconception around it. And also I think that is much of what we're taught as men, is sort of, when you throw some dirt on it and keep it moving almost,
Right.
and I think the thing that a lot of people sort of don't realize or don't want to face is the fact that that emotion, that pain, that trauma, it doesn't go anywhere, right? No matter how much you try and bury it down, at some point in time it's going to come out, and unfortunately oftentimes it comes out in places that do not deserve that sort of visceral emotion that is oftentimes in the form of violence or
Right.
self-harm or whatever it might be. And I guess I think there's something in the middle of all of this, though, because I think for me, I think there is value in some of the traditional aspects of the masculine, right? I think we also begin to go down this route where anything associated with masculine is bad, is negative, right? And I kind of, it's an interesting conversation that I'm beginning to see happen now, where maybe there's people saying, hey, maybe we're having a bit of an overcorrection where we're saying, man is bad, so therefore anything associated with man is terrible. And I think a lot of the younger generation then begin to question sort of, where do I fit into this world? What is my value, right? Where can I sort of lean into my masculine? When is it not appropriate? And I guess for you, what sort of has been that balance of going against the grain of maybe what we've been taught growing up about what it means to be a man, but also saying, hey, there is value in my masculine, in the sort of strength that is associated with being a man. I'm curious how you sort of walk that line.
I agree with you 100%. Like, there is a lot of talk that anything masculine is inherently bad, and I completely see that. I think that all of that, though, comes down to the overly strict application of general rules, general concepts, without necessarily having the introspective questioning that has to go with it. So in my case, for example, I know that I love art. I love literature. I love languages. I love babies. Like, my favorite thing in the world is like holding babies and playing with babies. All of those things in the environment that I was brought up in were looked upon as pretty feminine things, right? They were frowned upon. I love to cook. I'm the cook in our family all the time. All of those things. My mom, to this day, kind of denigrates my wife, Esther, because I'm the cook. Like, my mom believes that Esther is less of a woman, less of a wife, because her husband does the cooking, right? And that's it's silly to me, but that's what she believes, Sure. At the same time, I also know that I am the protector in my household. We travel all over the world with the kids, and I'm super aware that an important part of my role is to keep them safe, which I would say is a fairly traditional masculine role. That I'm also the fixer in the house. I grew up in a super blue collar household, re-roofing with my dad and, dropping trannies in the cars and all of this thing. So those are my jobs too. But that is me. That is what I bring to the equation, right? That is because I don't do them because it's a man job. I do them because that is sort of between the two of us. We're a team. We have a whole bunch of things that we need to accomplish. And we sort of use our comparative advantage to say, who's going to do this job? Who's going to do that job? It doesn't matter who's best suited for it. And that's how things play out. Some of them by definition are going to come out in sort of the traditional roles, but some of them aren't. And the truth is that once you see yourself not as a man trying to be a manly man or a woman trying to be overly feminine, but as a team, that your job is to put together this household and to carry those jobs forward as best as you can for yourselves, for your children, then the gender, the sex role that's assigned to that particular job becomes irrelevant. It's just who is better suited for this particular skill. She is a genius, a master of logistics. Like if I had to be the one to schedule us and to actually make stuff happen, we would go nowhere. This enterprise that we have would go absolutely nowhere, because that is 100% her skill and 0 mine. And at the same time, if we had to create a household where Esther was the one who fed everybody, the only advantage would be that we would all be thinner, because she does not like to cook. So,
yeah. But I think that's a great sort of, I think a great way to look. It's not black and white, right? And I think to your point, kind of even with the cooking thing, I think it's not this idea of. I think the thing is, we think we have to be either one or the other, right? And I think that's where the toxicness of the concept of masculinity comes into play, where it's like, to your point about your mother sort of thinking that okay, that's the woman's place or whatever it might be. I think that's where we begin to get ourselves into troubles, when we're too fixated on the black and white nature of these different things. But
Right.
to your point, there are certain traditional aspects that you are personally drawn to that inherently make you feel good inside to be able to take care of those things, be it protecting your family, be it being able to fix things around the house, right? And I think that is sort of the positive aspect of your personal, traditional masculinity, right, as a societal standard. And I think that is kind of a good way to sort of look at it, is it doesn't have to be sort of one or the other. And it's also a bit more of a personal journey than I think people, society, we have made it as a norm, right? We've made it sort of like everybody has to check a specific box to be considered a man. And to your point, there are certain things that you're naturally drawn to or naturally suited for that someone else might not be, but you're both sort of men in your own right in that context.
Right. And it's important to say also, something that you said just sort of sparked it for me. We happen to spend our time between Miami and the Dominican Republic. I'm actually calling you today from Santo Domingo. Oh, nice. And it's a great place, and we've sort of had this arrangement for several years now. But one of the interesting things about spending a lot of time in Latin America, and particularly in Caribbean Latin America, is that, for example, there is a tremendous amount of homophobia that is part of these societies, and that's a whole other layer. Realizing to come to the point where you realize that even masculine and feminine goes beyond sexuality. Right, that it's really fascinating to see that, but to hear some folks here who, for example, have to live in hiding. They're basically, there is no coming out. Everybody's sort of forced to stay in the closet, or at least pretend that they are, kind of a thing. And it's so much of that is because the society is set up in such a black and white, polarized, binary situation, like you described, that there isn't even necessarily room in the conceptualization of reality to allow for anything that doesn't fit neatly into these things. So, I know the struggles that I went through as a straight male. I can only imagine how much more difficult it is for folks who are on sort of in the LGBTQ groups.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's a great touch point as well, because it's even that conversation around authenticity, I think for me, when I hear certain like people's coming out stories, I have a lot of friends who are members of the LGBTQ plus community, and I can't help but feel emotionally tied to it, just on the level of not feeling like you could show up fully as yourself, right? And I felt like that in my own journey, and that's why I relate, and I'm such an advocate for that community, because I know if I felt it as a heterosexual man who doesn't have to deal with half the burdens that they do, I can only imagine what it was like to really be living in sort of this caricature version of yourself, and wishing so badly that you could just have the basic sort of human need of wanting to publicly be with your partner and not feel like you are being looked down upon or being disparaged for who you love, so
much less persecuted,
well, yeah, absolutely. And on the more unfortunate practical extreme practice of what it meant, especially in previous decades, the previous generation. It's sad, man. And I think that's I'm a big advocate for authenticity as well, because I think there's I think people are carrying around so many unnecessary burdens because they're just so afraid of showing the world who they are, and not even in term, obviously when it comes to homophobia and things like that, there are real inherent dangers if you find yourself in the wrong area or around the wrong person. But what's interesting to me on the sort of other side of that, a lot of people are really scared even with things that don't necessarily present physical danger to you, right? Even just the way that they want to dress, they, instead of expressing themselves in that way, they follow the trends and things like that. And I think it's just a really sort of, interesting sort of commentary on human beings and just how easy it is to fall in line, and just how pre-programmed we are from a young age to fall in line.
I mean, I think that's one of the things that really started out for us, the reason why we created Be.Act.Change. Actually, I don't remember. I'm not sure how much Esther told you from our origins, but originally Be.Act.Change started out as really just a YouTube channel, and it was just sort of a movement, and it was right around the beginning of COVID, and we felt that there was so much negativity happening, and we just wanted a venue to sort of share positivity, And over time, it's evolved into so much more. I don't think we could have predicted back then, even, and this was only 5 years ago, but I don't think we could have predicted what it has become for us. But so much of it is, we see that people are so fundamentally misaligned that there's such a strong desire as a society, whether it's our society, any society, to regulate, to give us sort of the set of rules that we are told are right and wrong, and that if we follow them, we're okay, and if we deviate from them, we're going to be ostracized, we're going to be mocked somehow, or whatever it is. And the impact that has on us as individuals, So I can say that the hardest thing for us in terms of putting out our messaging. And our messaging is one of understanding that each person that you meet has a superpower. There's something special that each individual brings, how it is that they approach the world, how it is that they solve problems, and that valuing that in others allows you to value it in yourself. It allows us to create what we call collective power, where what we create is a space where we're not competing with each other anymore, but actually valuing each other for what we bring and how it is that we can create better couples, better families, better communities, better societies together, right? The hardest thing in that movement is trying to get people away from the deeply ingrained thinking, feeling, it's almost instinctive in people that we want to categorize people. And that's the hardest part, right? Getting people to understand each person is an individual, and you value them for their individuality. You celebrate them for that individuality and what it is that they bring. You don't try to put them in a box because you don't even know what boxes are relevant to them, right? And so that's been the struggle for us, getting people to take the mindsets that they're used to, that they've grown up with, culturally, religiously, socially, and basically blowing them so much more wide open. I've had the luxury, the blessing in my life. I've traveled to 118 different countries in the world. So I've seen huge parts of the world. I've met all kinds of people, every religion, every color, every language, everything. And you get to the point where you realize that there is a fundamental humanity that brings everyone together. There's a fundamental humanity and if you approach people anywhere in the world with that mindset, that mindset of every individual is valuable, has a superpower, that there's something common that binds us together, the way in which you will have interactions with people throughout your life is so much more rewarding, so much more impactful, so much more fulfilling. And that's basically the messaging we're trying to put out there.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, obviously, I think traveling is probably one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself, to really get out of your comfort zone, to see how other people live and interact with one another. And I think it allows you to create a bit of, to your point, the humanization of each other, right? Of people who are different, and seeing the humanity and the beauty in things that are different. I think, what I've begun to realize, particularly in the time period that we're living in right now, it's a very polarizing time period, especially in the U.S. and politics and things of that nature. I think people have trouble with nuance, is sort of what I've been noticing, is being able to see a multi-layer sort of point of view. And even with people who maybe share your core belief, right? I'm a progressive, but for some people, I'm not progressive enough on certain things, and there's like this attack that happens, right? And I think, we've sort of lost a bit of the conversation around civil discourse, right? The ability to have civil discourse, the ability to disagree on certain things, but also understand that it doesn't mean that person is inherently a bad person. Now, obviously, there are lines to that. If they believe something that goes against your safety and your core beliefs, sure. But where we meet in the middle of we both respect each other, I think we move from a place of wanting to win a conversation rather than wanting to listen to one another. And I'm curious, from your work, from your perspective, have you sort of found that as well, as this sort of lack of the ability to conceptualize and accept nuance in conversation?
Yeah. So my history, my expertise, professionally, for example, is I have my PhD is in economics, but my field of expertise is really in strategic planning, and most of the strategic planning I'm doing is pretty high level. So it's sort of U.S. government type things, and it's international. So it's government to government, creating strategic plans for example, what any particular country is going to do over the next 5-7 years with U.S. government assistance. Mm-hmm. And it's something that requires a tremendous amount of negotiation between governments, but governments at the end of the day are individuals, right? So it's people, and even sort of the same team not always have the same objectives and all of that. And then it's starting to socialize those messages within their communities, within their countries. And so I would say that in that process, professionally, what I've seen is a progressive decline for, you said nuance, and I know completely what you mean. The word that came to my mind is information. Mm. So that what I started to see was that people are progressively becoming much more reactionary on an emotional level, making decisions at that level without necessarily accepting, much less being open to the idea of new information. Mm-hmm. And that, I think that's very closely tied to the nuance concept that you bring about, because that's what happens when you become, for example, a data analyst. The data is almost never going to tell you a black and white story, right? Sure. It's going to give you information, but as you dig into it, you start to tease out that there are nuances, there are subtle differences between groups, between regions, between effects, and all of that. So those things are, I would say, in peril a little bit. The willingness of people to dig into information, to really spend the time learning, to spend the time questioning sort of preconceived notions. Mm-hmm. There's so much more, I think, nowadays that is taken as not literally, but figuratively gospel, that this is the basis of fact that we're going to start from, and anything that deviates from that is fundamentally incorrect. It's a much more emotional, gut level, black and white kind of a thing. So, and I mean, certainly in the United States, I think we see that in a large part of the political discourse. So it's a really hard thing to to get people to do. It's, as I said, it's along the lines of, and I see why you asked the question, like our idea of having people be valued and understood as individuals requires a tremendous amount of nuance. It requires you to acquire information about people when it's much easier to just see them, categorize them, and move on with your life in a way, So I get it. What we're asking of people is to put in a little bit of work. But it's worth it because frankly, at this point, what's happening isn't working real well.
No, not at all. And I think what it's what I've realized as I get older. It's like you almost have to deprogram yourself from all the shit you were taught, and then really kind of like it's almost like just dumping it all on the floor and then looking at it from like standing above it and being like, okay, that makes sense. That obviously was some nonsense, and really being able to piece together kind of what is reality. I think we sort of. It's very disorienting right now, and I think it's because we have so much information, right? So you're being hit with so many things that are nonsense, that are BS, but also on the positive side of it, you're being shown a lot of things that you didn't know about prior to, right? You almost don't even necessarily have to leave, the country to start realizing how the other half lives almost, right? And that begins to open your mind. I mean, even things like, lost like African American history, the fact that like Juneteenth is this new idea really that people still don't even grasp fully of why it's such an important event, right? These are things we're having to relearn, or Christopher Columbus, sort of like, the change of how you grew up with him as a hero. Now it's like, well, actually he was, committed like a genocide against the natives, and so I think to your point, you have to do the work. And I think for a lot of people, their identity gets in the way of them deprogramming because they're so attached to this idea of themselves, their place in the world, and even I think conceptually the U.S. sort of as this dominant makes no mistakes, the greatest place on earth. Everybody else in the world is like struggling, and we're the only people who have figured it out type of idea that we've all grown up on. It's really disorienting to sort of wake up one day and say, wow, was it all just a lie? And I've been sort of leading this weird path that really just goes nowhere. I'm just fucking spinning like a hamster wheel almost. And I think that's probably where, that's difficult, I think, to ask people to do so. But I mean, that's it's like that or like you just sort of lived life as a zombie almost,
Right. And that's where we're at, the thing, here's the thing. The thing is that I did that. Yeah. I've lived life as a zombie. I've lived life as the person who accepted the status quo, who lived day to day. And that's what happens when you living as a zombie means that you're living day to day, right? Your planning horizon comes down really, really close to you. You don't think too much beyond sort of the immediate future, right? And what the impact of that is that you start to do things that don't make sense to you, things that are taking you further away from your core because you're just taking little steps. You're just taking little steps and you're not going in any particular direction. So every time I think of something, I think of my dad. So my dad's a mechanic. Mm-hmm. And so anything that has an engine, a motor, my dad loves it, right? Yeah. My dad, whenever my sister or I were just sitting around doing nothing, which frankly was almost never because they always had us working our asses off, right? Sure. But in those rare moments when we would be doing nothing, my dad would come up to us. He would put his hands in front of our faces and move them up and down, show our fingers up and down, right? Without actually bringing his fingers together, right? He would just go like this. So what is that? In my dad's worldview, that is your transmission in neutral. This is your transmission in neutral. You're going absolutely nowhere, right? So for him, being a zombie is that you're just going nowhere, right? And the same thing, whenever my dad was thinking about something and like the idea, the solution would click in his mind, I would see him all the time. He would visibly do that same movement, but actually bring all of his fingers together because suddenly now I'm in gear. Now I'm thinking, right? So whenever I think of that whole living as a zombie, you're just living in neutral. You're going nowhere, right? And so for us, I know that this movement is something. It's tough. We're swimming upstream, we're pushing against the the status quo. That's why my T-shirt says "Push Boundaries."
Nice,
because that's what we're here to do. We're not here to be a neutral. We're here to click gears and move forward. And it's a fight worth fighting. And I would say also, similar but different. One of the groups that we speak a lot to is a group that we call trailblazers. It's the folks who are on the forefront. It's the folks who are doing something for the first time, and it could be anything. Like when I'm a first gen college student, I was 100% a trailblazer for doing that. It's not, was I the first person ever to go to college? Obviously not. But in my family, in my circles, anyone around me, I had to navigate that path on my own. And the fortitude that it takes to go into uncharted territory without a roadmap, without even a voice of inspiration behind you sometimes, takes so much strength. But at the end of the day, if what we're after is, creating social change, improving our communities, improving our own well-being and our own, standing in the community, whatever it is that moves you, you have to take those steps. You're not going to make the change, have the impact that you in your heart and your soul want to have without taking those trailblazing steps sometimes, So here we are, pushing that envelope a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think, to your point, it's the individual's sort of choice to hop on that journey. I think only, persons like you and I could have the conversation, hopefully introduce these ideas to maybe somebody who hasn't thought about it in this manner. And but at the end of the day, that it's up to the individual to take that step, and also I think on the flip side of it, we have to have some empathy for people who aren't ready to do that yet. And, aren't at that point in their journey. And I think it's easy to sort of get frustrated, especially when you've sort of done the work and say like, how do you not see this? You just want to shake somebody, but I think, as with anything, it's always more impactful when somebody makes a decision based upon their own sort of free will rather than you forcing them into something.
Yeah.
But one thing that,
but they also can't make people can't make any changes that they haven't seen, right? When we talk when we talk about representation and the importance of all of that, that's part of it. And I know that Esther and I spend a lot of time talking to youth, to universities and all of that. And probably the most common reaction that we get, because she and I actually do keynote speeches together. We do a joint keynote speech where she and I trade off, and we do workshops together and all of that. And one of the biggest comments that we get from the young people is they've never seen sort of what they call a power couple like that were Latinos. They've never seen a husband and wife who happily work together, who talk so much about their individual and their joint dreams and that alignment. It's just conversations they've never seen happen before in people that look like us. So part of that change is showing people that there is a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The representation obviously is half the battle, and the introduction of concepts, I think is sort of what a lot of people are lacking. To your point, it's not something we speak about, especially in our community. The idea of wellness and personal growth are not kitchen table topics.
Right.
But I wanna close out on something that I feel like I haven't really gotten a chance to touch on.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting concept for me because I really, we were talking about this country and I think a bit of economics and things of that nature. I know you speak about the American dream for Latinos, right? And you talk about broken promises and the fallacy of the American dream for Latinos. I think the world as a whole is maybe waking up to the idea that the American dream is not necessarily all that it's cracked up to be, or maybe not even a real thing for my generation and younger. But specifically when it comes to Latinos, I'd be curious to hear your perspective of how you think it's affecting our community.
For sure. No, I appreciate that. So for one, a lot of this comes from the research that we did for our book, right? Our book is called Creating Your Limitless Life. And the sort of subtitle of it is Chasing the American Dream Crossed Out, right? So it's a big piece of what we saw in doing this research, right? Okay, so the American dream, for one, it's really important to note that the American dream is a concept and it's a global concept. So even in Australia, you hear people talking about the American dream and living it in Australia and things like that, right? So it's this idea of people going somewhere else to seek their fortune, right? The American dream, from a definition point of view, from like a concept point of view, is basically about a situation where if there is social equality, or equity at least, that basically everyone is starting on the same footing, and that what gets you ahead is your own effort, right? And that combination of equity and effort is what allows you to create your highest aspirations, right? That's the concept. Switch that over to how it is that that's been applied in reality. Nowadays, if you look up the American dream on any website, you look it up on the New York Times or whatever, what comes up is that they have now measures of the American dream. And the measures of the American dream are your car, your house, your job, your income, your education level, right? They're very sort of checkmark sort of things. So we've translated this beautiful idea of equity and opportunity and effort and your highest aspirations into a checkbox list, right? And so we have so many of our people, our ancestors, frankly, from all over the world, but so many from Latin America, who are coming here with that hope of the American dream. Okay, so we get here and we realize, one, that equity is not real, right? We know that there's generational wealth that has an impact, there's systemic racism that has an impact. So just from the starting point, that equity isn't there. Okay. The second piece is that there's a huge, there's an income gap, right? So for every dollar that a non-Latino makes, a Latino makes about 77 cents. So there's that 23%. And then you add to that the generational wealth impact. So for every dollar that a white person or a non-Latino person has in assets, a Latino has 20 cents. So there's a fivefold gap there. That's massive, right? And that means that Latinos are less likely to, one, be having their money work for them productively, but it also means that they're less likely to invest in healthcare, less likely to invest in education, less likely to invest in all of these things that are going to build them up individually and as a group, right? There has been definitely progress in that over the last couple of decades, but that gap that I'm telling you about is what still exists today. So you can imagine how far we've had to come just to get to that point. Okay, what does that mean though? So one is that this creates a tremendous amount of stress and pressure and anxiety in Latino communities. When you look at mental health, which we talked about a little bit earlier, Latinos, there are 4 million Latinos in the United States every year who undergo extreme depressive episodes. Which, and you know, I'm not a psychologist, but what I understand from this is that it's not just I feel bad or I'm feeling down one day. It's I can't function. People notice. The people around me are worried, right? To the point, add to that among that group, there is a significantly higher percentage of that group who undergoes suicidal ideation in addition to that depression. So there's a huge group of them that not only do they feel awful, but they're not even sure that they can continue in their lives, that they're not sure that they have value to add to the world anymore. And when they are asked about what is it that brings you to this point? Why do you feel that way? The answers almost always come down to them feeling like they are not reaching the check marks of the American dream. I'm not providing enough for my family. I've been here however many years and I haven't been able to buy a house yet. I haven't been able to send the amount of remittances that I want to back to my home country. All of these things, it's the check marks, boom, boom, boom. I feel like I'm deficient in all of them, you know? And what I find personally fascinating, amazing, baffling, and confusing is that despite all of that, in the United States, they've done these polls asking people about the American dream and their beliefs in it. Latinos are some of the ones that support the idea of the American dream more than anyone. You know, so I think it's a really interesting wake-up call, I hope, for our communities. One is that, you know, sort of for immigrants in general, but one is that it's not without cost to leave your country, right? as bad as things are there sometimes, you have community, you have your culture, you have your people around you, and picking up and leaving all that behind definitely has an emotional, spiritual, financial, physical cost to it. But the second piece also is that understanding, once you're here and once you are sort of trying to make your way forward, that still that importance of not tying your success, not tying your concept of did I make it or did I not make it just to those check marks of the American dream, right? That there's so much more that could be defined as success for you, you know. And I say that as the child of immigrants, the child of somebody who grew up with that, you know, who grew up hearing about, you know, what we sacrificed for you, and you know, and what we left behind for you, and being told that as a result of that, I had to act in a certain way also, you know. So that it's tough, you know. That I see the appeal of it. I've lived overseas for well over a decade now, and I talk to so many people in our countries who say, I just want to go there. I just want to go there. I just want to go there. And I spent a lot of time counseling them on, are you sure? Why? You know, why do you want to go there? Why can't you seek opportunity here? You know, why do you have to unplug and go over there into something that is, one, completely unknown? It's a different language. It's a different place. The cost of living is so much higher, and you're alone. You know, so it's a fascinating thing. You know, there's so many layers to it, between the immigration and what happens on the home side, and then the mentality that coming to the U.S. and chasing those metrics of the American dream have on your children. You know, Esther talks about it really, really eloquently about her family. You know, her dad comes from a very, very well-known family in Nicaragua. Mm-hmm. And so for him to have come to the United States means him letting go of his own childhood dreams. Mm. And that has a price. You know, he's somebody, he's an older man now. He's in his late 70s now. And coming to realize that he wasn't able to live out and create all the dreams that he had as a young man because he came to the US. You know, so, and then that gets passed on to your children, right? Your parents, the broken dreams of immigrant parents get passed on to their children, you know, and it's such a fascinating conversation. I know that, you know, as I said, my dad's a mechanic. The truth is, my dad was born to be a mechanic. He's a brilliant mechanic, but in his mind, he always wanted to be an engineer. Mm. Had he stayed in El Salvador, I think he would have tried to become an engineer. But coming here derailed all of that. So same thing, you know. And so what happened when I was, you know, late high school looking at colleges, I got pushed real hard to try to go into engineering school, which was not my jam. And thank God I didn't give in to that. But, you know, it's their broken dreams getting passed on to us, you know.
Yeah. No, you're speaking to the, you know, the choir, preaching to the choir, as they say, with that. And I think also even community is the other you know, when you touch on that, I notice it now. I go back to Puerto Rico as an adult, and I spent a lot of time there. My family is blessed that we still have the house that my dad grew up in over there. So you know, our neighbors on that block are they're adults now, but they were the kids that my dad grew up with, you know, and they all grew up in that area, and they help watch and maintain the house when we're not there, right? There's this real family community thing going on there. And then even I feel the difference in my interactions with strangers over there. There's a different warmth. There's a different sort of just welcoming, you know, like I feel a part of something, right? And I think that is to your point. I think when we talk about the American dream, or like this propagandized version of it, the materialistic version of it, I think that is why probably so many people, when they do potentially achieve it, when they've you know, received the money, the job, the house, or whatever it is, they still feel incredibly empty inside, because we sort of we're forgetting that real deeper layer. I think that actually probably is more the dream than in any of this other bullshit.
I mean, I will tell you that we got to a point in our lives where we very much achieved the American dream. You know, we were PhDs, diplomats, living in, you know, luxury housing, and, you know, paid for our kids' school, and we had like an army between nannies and drivers and all of that. We were very much living the American dream. And I think that's probably the time in our lives where we have felt the most misaligned, right? That this was not the impact we wanted to be having. This was not necessarily the work that was advancing what we saw as our own legacies, and again, we saw that situation. We got to the point where we realized this isn't what was going to be right for us, and it's a hard thing. Try telling your immigrant parents that you are going to give up your pension job that you can have for life, that pays for housing and schooling for your kids at the private school, but you're going to give that up because that's not what's right for you. That's a tough one, but the truth is, it's the best thing that we could have done. It's the best thing that we could have done. We live in a smaller place now, but it's a place that allows us, and we changed jobs, right? We left that job. We live in a smaller place now, but we're in a situation now where we have the freedom, we have the ability to create the movement that we want to create, to have the impact on people that we want to have. And that for us is how we define success, right? That is our new dream. It's not the check marks of the American dream, but it's our dream. Our dream has been and always will be to have that positive impact, to help people come into alignment, discover their superpowers. And that's the work that we're doing, So for me, our situation has changed, but the value, the impact, the feeling of our current life is so much more aligned with us, and I would never go back.
No, that's beautifully said, and yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think a lot of the American dream that we are taught, I think, is based upon feeding our ego, and I think that will only get us but so far, I think, on the journey of happiness. And I wish it was something that we could conceptualize to the younger generation a little bit more easily. I think, unfortunately, it's something that oftentimes you have to experience it yourself, where you get the thing that you wanted only to realize that it wasn't all that. Like I pray
sometimes we learn the hard way.
Yeah, unfortunately, man. I really I try to drive that home, and I know it's easier said than done to recognize, that what's really important in this life. But no, I mean, these are obviously incredibly important conversations, and all the work that you and your wife are doing are incredibly important. So I salute you for that. And anything you want to push people to, where can they check out more of the work that you and Esther are doing?
For sure. Yeah, we're pretty easy to find. So we have a nice website, Be.Act.Change.com. We have a nice Instagram page, which is Be.Act.Change. I really encourage people to take a look at our book. So as I mentioned, the book is called Creating Your Limitless Life. Esther is the primary author on that, Esther Celedon with a Z. It's available anywhere that you buy books. It's really important for us that we have the workbook that accompanies it. So there's, the book is sort of half her memoir and narrative, and then half our techniques for purpose, alignment, legacy, resilience. But we also have a workbook that basically walks you through all of that as well. And we have it in Spanish as well for a lot of our listeners for whom that's important. And it's really important for us to say that the book, the workbook, and the Spanish workbook, if you're willing to buy the Kindle version, we have it there for 99 cents. That's our pricing. It's not a promotional pricing. It is the pricing that we believe in for that, because we want to make sure that anybody who needs this, who wants this kind of information and approach, has access to it, which is not something that we didn't have as kids, right? We didn't have access to this kind of stuff. And so we want to make sure that that's never a barrier for anyone. So that's us. That's where you can find us. You can also, me personally, if you want to link up, I'm most active on LinkedIn, and I'm there as Dr. Paul Rivera.
Amazing. Well, Dr. Paul Rivera, I appreciate you for hopping on the show, man. I really enjoy the conversation, and definitely would love to have you back on in the future.
Oh, this was tremendous. Thank you so much.
Man, big shout out to my guest this week, Dr. Paul Rivera, for hopping on the show. There were so many things. I told him this, I think, after the fact, and obviously, towards the end here, but I really would love to have him back on the show, because I thought, the conversation around the American dream for immigrants, and I think just the American dream in general, that topic of conversation is fascinating to me, as far as what that means in the current landscape of the world that we live in today. And I'll touch on some of the takeaways in our conclusions too.
Time for conclusions soon.
All right, so as I was kind of touching on, a lot of interesting things to take away. I think, I think first thing I'll continue that thought that I had. I think the idea of the American dream and it's being broken, or it being a fallacy, particularly from the perspective of Latinos or immigrant cultures, but I think people of color in general. And I think, a lot of people are feeling this if you don't come from money. I think this is a really interesting topic of conversation, but also even beyond, I think, the general, like, economic sort of by the book numbers type thing where homeownership is nearly impossible for many people because of how expensive it is. Demand is far outweighing supply. All of these different things, right? Wages not increasing with, inflation at the appropriate rate. Everything, right? All of that is a very real conversation. But I think also, I love how we leaned into the idea also of the sort of materialistic aspect of the American dream, right? These sort of boxes that are meant to be checked, the status boxes, right? Of this represents how successful you are in your life, right? Particular home, a particular car, job title, whatever it might be, right? And I think that a lot of that narrative obviously is really only beneficial to a materialistic world, to corporate America, to capitalism, right? Because it gets us buying expensive things. It gets us, participating in that culture of constantly wanting the next thing, right? And the sort of, I guess the thing that is disappointing about it, even if you reach it, it's an empty, success. It's an empty goal at the end of the day. And I talk about this a lot, right? But I think reimagining what the American dream is supposed to be, I think, is what, our generation, my generation and younger, need to begin to do. And I think because maybe we have the privilege that our parents didn't have, obviously, we can be a little bit more selective, or we can be a little bit more intentional with how we live our life. And obviously everybody's circumstance is different, but I think when you begin to really grasp and get on board with the idea that the brand of your car doesn't matter, the size of your home doesn't matter unless it actually does in terms of, like, adequate space for your family size. The brand of clothing you wear doesn't matter, right? Once we begin to release ourselves from those chains, I think we begin to have more clarity on what actually brings us real happiness. And we can then sort of cultivate our own personal version of the American dream. And I think that's sort of where the issue, and when he speaks about the fallacy of the American dream, what it is, it's sort of this one-size-fits-all mentality that is created and has been sort of propagandized by capitalism and making us all believe that is the answer and that's what we should be striving for. When in reality, for many of us, for most of us, probably all of us, if we're really being honest and have a lot more self-awareness, in sort of our fulfillment and happiness, none of that actually makes us happy. Now, granted, money makes you happy in terms of the ability to bring peace to your life, to not have to worry about it, the ability to have the freedom to do what you want to do when you feel like doing it. That for sure brings happiness and fulfillment. But it's not, again, it's not literally the dollar amount. It's the idea of having enough to do what you personally want to do. And that definition is different for all of us. What I want to do might be different than what you want to do. And I think that is the great message I pulled out from this. And I don't want, I'm literally could go and do a whole nother episode about that. I think I have, but I'll kind of like catch myself there. But I think just important food for thought as we're kind of all trying to, I think, begin to unlearn the negative things that hold us back from finding real happiness and fulfillment. I love the fact that he said that he downsized with his wife and they've been happier than ever. I also loved the topic of vulnerability. I love him sharing that story about him loving to dance, and when he was made fun of by a family member, he stopped participating in that as a kid. And I resonated with that a lot because it speaks to how these little moments that we have throughout the course of our life can completely uproot the rest of our existence if we're not aware of them. And that's why it's so important to do the work and to like get to the root cause of why you might not be feeling, confident or like you love yourself or whatever it is that you struggle with, right? And that's why that work is so important. And also, I love when he talked about sort of blowing up his life and being very intentional with sort of cutting certain people out of his life, even if they were, lifelong friends or whatever it might be. And really making it a point to say, I only want to surround myself with people who champion me. And that really stuck with me because I think I'm at a point in my life, and maybe this is, I should have asked him what age that kind of happened at for him, but I feel like this begins to happen as you get closer to 30 and definitely in your 30s, but you begin to really start taking inventory of people around you, of the habits you have, right? And I don't know, something really struck me about him talking about surrounding yourself with people who champion you. That really struck a nerve for me. Because I think I have sort of lived a lot of my adult life trying to impress those around me with my accomplishments and sort of saying, I almost like I'm forcing you to believe in me, right? And like once I achieve this, then they'll support me. But to his point, it should be the other way around, right? You shouldn't have to be convincing people of your capabilities, of your talent, of your skill. Those closest to you should be cheering you on before seeing the results, right? Just because they believe in you and because they care for you. Like they should be your greatest supporters, regardless of the fact that maybe you haven't achieved what you set out to do just yet, that you don't have the tangible proof, right? And obviously, not everybody is going to believe in you, and there are going to be people who hop on after you've achieved what you said you were going to do. But to his point, those people in your inner circle should always be supporting you from day one. Even if they don't get it, they're supporting you, the person, because they believe in you, the person. And that really struck a nerve with me, and like really after our conversation and still right now as I talk about it, beginning to really sort of like create this index in my mind, this Rolodex, and like, I don't know if I'm explaining that properly, but like just assessing the people that I see on a frequent basis and saying, do they fit into that category? And then having to like have the gut check moment of like, man, they don't. And here I am like, oh yeah, it's my friend. And even as I'm somebody who's like quick to be like, oh, that's an acquaintance, not my friend. And even with that, there's certain people in my mind that I'm just like, man, I've been calling you a friend. I've been, sort of going out of my way to make sure I'm a part of your life in important moments or whatever it might be. And like, you didn't even buy one of my books when I self-published a book. Right? And not because, and I don't say that as like, I want your money type of thing. I just say that as like, this is your friend taking a risk and doing something. Why wouldn't you support them? And I'm not guilting anybody into buying a book. But it's just these sort of benchmarks, right? And it's like, oh, well, they support you when you do certain DJ gigs and things like that. And it's like, yeah, of course they do. When I'm playing a gigantic show and there's free liquor and they're all single dudes and we're in a club and they're friends with the DJ, of course they're going to come and support. That's so beneficial to them. Right? But what about when nobody's watching, when it's something like the book and it's just them placing an order online just to legitimately support when they're getting nothing out of it? Who's willing to do that for you? Because I'd be willing to do that for them. And I'm not even like I'm having a moment of vulnerability because I want you all to have these honest conversations with yourself. And truthfully, I'm not like, oh, fuck these people, I'll never see them again. But I can sort of see how subconsciously I have been putting space between myself and them. When I have a free night off, I'm not running to be like, yo, do you guys want to go out tonight or something? I've sort of been like, let me see what else is going on that I want to do before I sort of go that route, right? I'd rather just stay home and rest. And I think subconsciously I've been like feeling like, all right, this just is not the level of friendship that I'm wanting in my life or need at this point in my life or deserve. I deserve more than that, right? And again, it's food for thought. Again, I'm not telling anybody to go out and like tell all your friends to fuck off because they're not like supporting everything you do or whatever. It's all our own personal journey, but I think there was something again that struck a nerve when he talked about like, I only have a place in my life for people who are going to champion me. And it was like, fuck, that's the next level right there. Right? That's like, I'm no longer going to have 1 foot in, 1 foot out with my ideal life. It's like, nah, I'm going all in and I'll be lonely for a while, but like, this is the elevation that needs to happen where it's like, I'm only having people in my life who celebrate me, and like that will help me unfold the next chapter of my life, and I can't keep playing in what's comfortable. That's sort of what came up for me, and obviously it's easier said than done, but I don't know, man, just that struck a nerve, and I wanted to just kind of share, I guess, that inner dialogue that's happening with me as I think about it. With that said, thank y'all so much for tuning in. I know that was a weird way to end it, but yeah, I don't know. I don't want you to ever think I have all the answers or like I'm doing things perfectly. I'd rather just give you what I'm honestly like processing when we talk about certain things, and like I'm just figuring this shit out as well. I just happen to be blessed with the platform, and like I'm okay with being open about it, So that's it. Other than that, we're all in the same boat here. So just a reminder. But thank y'all so much for tuning in. Again, I'm so sorry we missed on Thursday Trends last week, but I promise you we will be hitting it on Thursday for Thursday Trends as normal. Until then, stay safe, and we will talk soon. Peace.